I've been on a solo road trip for a few weeks, just hitting random small towns and trying to see parts of the country I'd usually fly over. It's been mostly peaceful, just me and the open road. That is, until last Tuesday night. I'd been driving for hours through a stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, barely seeing other cars on the road. The sun had set, and that drowsy fog was starting to settle over me, so I decided to pull off at the next town and take a break. I needed gas, snacks, and some fresh air. I saw a Walmart sign and figured that was as good a place as any. The town itself was tiny, maybe a couple hundred people, tops. Everything was dark except for the Walmart, this lone bright spot in an otherwise empty area. There were only a handful of cars in the parking lot, but it looked open and well lit, so I parked close to the entrance and headed inside, figuring I'd grab a few things and stretch my legs. Inside, it was dead quiet. The fluorescent lights felt harsh against the emptiness. There were maybe two other shoppers, a tired-looking woman with a toddler, and some guy wandering around in a mechanic's uniform. I grabbed some snacks, a bottle of water, and an energy drink, paid at the self-checkout, and headed back out to my car. That's when things got weird. As I stepped outside, I noticed a man standing about 3 cars down from mine, just staring. He was tall, skinny, maybe mid-40s, with a scruffy beard and greasy hair pulled back into a low ponytail. His clothes looked old and worn, flannel and jeans that seemed too big for him. I figured he was just some local who'd had too much to drink or was waiting for someone, but his eyes were locked onto me. Not just casually glancing, but fully, intently staring. I tried to brush it off. I walked past him, giving a polite nod without making eye contact, but I felt his gaze follow me as I got to my car. My heart rate picked up a bit, but I told myself to just keep calm, get in, and drive off. I got into my car, locked the doors, and started it up. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw him standing behind my car. He was just a few feet away, staring at me through the back window, his expression blank. I thought maybe he was going to ask me for money or directions or something, so I cracked my window an inch and said, "Can I help you, man?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, looking at me, his face slowly breaking into this weird, unsettling smile. It wasn't friendly. It was cold, calculated, like he'd found something he'd been looking for. I felt a chill run down my spine. I repeated, "Is there something you need?" trying to keep my voice steady, but he still said nothing. Just that same creepy smile, his eyes unblinking. I was thoroughly freaked out by this point. My brain went into overdrive, trying to decide what to do. I wasn't about to get out of the car, not with him so close. I looked around the lot, hoping to see someone else, a witness, maybe someone who could help. But it was empty. Just me, my car, and this guy who looked like he had no intention of moving. So I did the only thing I could think of. I put the car in reverse, intending to back out and drive away. But as soon as I did, he stepped behind my car, blocking me from leaving. I froze, my foot hovering over the brake. He took a couple of slow steps closer until he was right at my bumper, and then leaned down, peering directly into my rear windshield. His face was inches away from the glass, that sick grin plastered across his face. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I thought about honking, but something told me that would just set him off. Instead, I put the car in drive, hoping maybe he'd move if I started to pull forward. But he didn't budge. He stayed rooted in place like he was daring me to try something. Then, without warning, he started walking around to the side of my car. He moved slowly, dragging his hand across the driver's side window, his eyes locked on mine through the glass. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely think, and every instinct screamed at me to get out of there. I gripped the steering wheel, watching him as he circled around to the passenger side, pausing just long enough to glance inside. That's when he lifted his hand and tapped on the glass, once, twice with this unnervingly soft knock. I felt completely paralyzed. He was still smiling, but now he looked excited, like he knew he was scaring me, and he was getting a thrill out of it. After what felt like an eternity, he moved back to the rear of my car, giving me just enough room to back out. I didn't waste a second. I threw the car in reverse and floored it, swinging around him as I sped out of the lot. As I drove off, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing in the middle of the lot, watching me leave, that eerie smile still plastered across his face. I kept driving for hours, not daring to pull over, too freaked out to even think about sleeping. I haven't been able to shake that encounter since. What was his deal? Was he just some messed up local looking to scare an out-of-towner, or was there something else? All I know is that I'll never stop at a random Walmart in the middle of nowhere again, especially not alone. This happened back in 2010, and even now I still can't fully explain what went down that night. It was supposed to be just a dumb, late-night run for snacks, but it ended with all four of us seriously freaked out. And we're all pretty skeptical people, so that's saying something. It was about 2 a.m., and me, my best friend Jake, his girlfriend Sarah, and her cousin Alex were hanging out in Jake's basement watching some trashy horror movies. We'd gone through all the snacks way too quickly, and we were craving more junk food. None of us could drive yet, so we biked everywhere, and the only place open that late was the Walmart a few miles away. I remember feeling this weird sense of excitement. Being out so late felt like a little adventure, something our parents wouldn't approve of. We got there around 2:30, locked up our bikes, and headed in. The place was practically deserted, just a couple of exhausted employees stocking shelves. The overhead lights were buzzing, casting this dim, almost sickly light over the aisles. The whole place felt off, but we figured it was just the fact that it was so late and we were kind of tired. We split up to grab stuff faster. I went with Jake to the chip aisle, while Sarah and Alex headed to grab soda and candy. Jake and I were debating between Cool Ranch and Nacho Cheese Doritos when I heard footsteps behind us, slow and deliberate. I turned around, expecting it to be Sarah and Alex, but no one was there. The aisle was empty. I brushed it off as one of the employees stocking shelves in another aisle and went back to debating flavors. A few minutes later, we started to hear this strange sound, like metal clinking against metal. It was soft at first, almost like something small and metal was rolling across the tile, but it got louder, echoing down the aisle. Jake looked at me, raising an eyebrow. "What the hell is that?" We decided to check it out and walked to the end of the aisle, peering down into the next one. It was empty, but the clinking noise continued, steady and rhythmic, and it was starting to really get under my skin. I swear it sounded like it was coming from all directions, like it was surrounding us. We walked back, a bit unnerved, and finally found Sarah and Alex. They had their arms full of snacks and looked just as confused as we did. "You guys heard that too, right?" Sarah asked. We nodded, and Jake joked that maybe we were all just hearing things from staying up too late. But just as we started heading toward the checkout, we noticed something really strange. There was this guy standing a few aisles down, maybe in his mid-40s, wearing an oversized hoodie and looking down at the ground. At first, we thought he was another late-night shopper, but he was standing so still, like he was frozen in place, and his head was tilted down so we couldn't see his face. We tried to walk past him, keeping our distance, but he turned his head slowly as we passed, and I swear his eyes were empty, like he was staring through us, not at us. Jake whispered, "That dude is seriously creepy," and we all kind of nervously laughed it off, hurrying to the checkout. But the guy just kept watching us, that blank stare following us as we walked away. We were paying when the clinking sound started up again, louder this time, echoing through the front of the store. Sarah turned pale, and Alex mumbled, "Let's just get out of here. This is getting too weird." As soon as the self-checkout machine spit out our receipt, we grabbed our stuff and made a beeline for the exit. And that's when we saw him again. The same guy, just standing by the doors, blocking our way out. He hadn't moved fast enough to get there before us. It was impossible. But there he was, watching us with those empty eyes, and this faint grin starting to spread across his face. I felt a chill run down my spine, and even Jake looked genuinely freaked out. We all froze, trying to figure out what to do, when he slowly raised his hand and pointed right at us. He didn't say a word, just pointed, his face twisting into this unsettling smile that looked wrong, like his mouth was stretching too far. Then, in the quiet of the store, he whispered something that sounded like, "I see you." And right then, the lights flickered. All of them, the entire store, plunged into darkness for maybe a second, but it felt like an eternity. When they flickered back on, he was gone. Just gone. No footsteps, no sound, nothing. The four of us bolted out of there, practically sprinting to our bikes, not even bothering to look back. We didn't stop until we were halfway home, gasping for breath and trying to make sense of what had just happened. Jake kept saying it must have been a prank, but there was something in his eyes that told me he didn't believe that any more than I did. For days after, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of weird, sleep-deprived hallucination, or just some creepy guy messing with us. But every time I close my eyes, I can still see his face, that twisted smile, and those empty, soulless eyes. The part that scares me the most? Right before the lights went out, I swear I saw something else in those eyes. Like he knew us. Like he was waiting for us. I don't know what he was or how he disappeared, but we've never gone back to that Walmart at night since. And I don't think we ever will. I was on my way home from visiting a friend about 3 hours away. It was late, just past midnight, and I'd been running on caffeine and snacks for most of the drive. My energy drink had finally worn off, and I needed a quick break. So when I saw the glowing sign for a Walmart off the highway in a small town, I decided to pull off for a quick pit stop. The town itself looked deserted, not a soul in sight, and the Walmart was practically empty. There were a couple of cars in the parking lot, but no signs of life around them. I parked a few spaces from the entrance, figuring I'd be in and out in a few minutes. I just wanted to grab another drink and maybe a snack. Inside, it was dead quiet, the type of silence that makes every little sound echo. I walked through the fluorescent aisles, scanning the shelves for something to keep me going. I didn't see any other customers, just one cashier at the far end of the store, flipping through a magazine and looking as bored as humanly possible. I finally grabbed an energy drink and some chips and made my way back toward the checkout. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I brushed it off at first, figuring it was just my imagination, but when I turned around, I saw him. A tall man, maybe in his 40s, standing at the end of the aisle, just staring at me. He was almost too still, his body perfectly straight, his head slightly tilted. He wore a grimy-looking jacket and jeans, his face pale and his eyes wide. For a split second, I thought maybe he was just another shopper who happened to wander down the same aisle. But he didn't move, just kept staring at me, unblinking. I gave him a polite nod, mumbled, "Hey," and turned back toward the checkout, trying to shake off the chills creeping up my spine. I paid for my stuff and walked out, telling myself he was probably just some local night owl, maybe a little off but harmless. As I walked out, I glanced over my shoulder, and sure enough, he was standing near the exit, watching me leave. I quickened my pace and headed straight for my car. The lot was still empty, but every step felt heavier, like my instincts were screaming at me to hurry. I got to my car, unlocked it, and climbed in as fast as I could. I thought I was safe, that I just had a creepy encounter, nothing more. Then, just as I was about to pull out, I saw him again. He was standing at the edge of the lot, staring straight at me, his face barely visible in the dim parking lot lights. He started walking toward my car, slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving mine. I shifted into drive, my heart hammering in my chest. I started to pull out, but something about the way he was moving, so steady, so unhurried, made me feel like he knew exactly what he was doing. I wanted to gun it out of there, but I didn't want to lose control and risk crashing. He kept coming closer, a menacing smile creeping onto his face, his gaze fixed right on me. I rolled my window up, trying to put a barrier between us, but it did nothing to stop the feeling that he was somehow getting into my head. As he got closer, he lifted one hand and pointed directly at me, mouthing something I couldn't make out. Every hair on my body stood on end. I didn't know if he was armed or just out of his mind, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I hit the gas and tore out of the lot, my tires screeching as I sped toward the road. I glanced in my rearview mirror, thinking he'd be back in the parking lot, but instead I saw him sprinting after my car, his movements jerky, almost unnatural, as if he was forcing himself to keep pace. I floored it, my car fishtailing a bit before gaining traction. The road out of town was empty, just a straight shot into pitch-black darkness. I kept checking my mirror, half expecting to see his face pressed up against the glass. But he was gone. I tried to calm down, to convince myself that he was just some deranged guy who got a kick out of scaring strangers. But about 10 minutes later, I saw headlights in the distance, gaining on me fast. It was a beat-up old truck, barreling down the road, headlights bouncing as it hit every dip and bump in the asphalt. My heart dropped. It was him. It had to be. I sped up, pushing my car way past the speed limit, but the truck kept gaining. I could see him behind the wheel, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights, his eyes wide and fixed on me. His mouth was open, lips moving as if he were chanting something, his gaze so intense it felt like he could see right into my soul. I swerved into a side road, hoping to lose him, but he followed, his headlights flooding my car with an eerie glow. The road was narrow, flanked by thick trees, and I had no idea where it led. I just kept driving, praying it would lead me somewhere safe. But there was nothing but darkness ahead. Then my worst fear happened. The road ended in a dead end, a barrier blocking any way forward. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a halt as I realized I was trapped. I looked around frantically, trying to figure out where to go, but there was nowhere to hide. The truck's headlights were getting closer, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to close in around me. I threw my car into reverse, trying to turn around, but by then it was too late. He'd pulled up right behind me, blocking any escape. He climbed out of the truck, his face illuminated by the headlights, that same twisted smile plastered across his face. I had nowhere to go. My hands were shaking as he walked toward my car, his movements slow and deliberate, like he was savoring every moment. I locked the doors, gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles turned white, praying he'd just go away. He stopped right outside my window, his face inches from the glass. I'll never forget the look in his eyes, like he was staring straight into my soul. He raised his hand and tapped on the glass, his fingers leaving smudges that looked like smeared blood. He leaned in, his breath fogging up the window, and whispered, "You can't run." I don't know what came over me, but in a blind panic, I shifted into reverse and slammed on the gas. My car lurched back, hitting his truck with a loud crash, but it was enough to knock it out of the way. I didn't wait, I just peeled out of there, tearing down the road, my heart racing as I left him standing in the dust. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, and even then I didn't feel safe. It's been days, and I still feel like he's watching me, waiting for me to slip up. If you're ever out on the road and decide to stop somewhere random, trust your instincts. And if you ever see a man with that kind of look in his eyes, just drive. Don't stop. Don't look back.